Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 8th episode of the Essendon Board BigFooty podcast for season 2021. I'm your host, Bonser34, and I'm joined again by TheGrizz for this evening's podcast. How are you, TheGrizz?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Always doing well after a win over Hawthorne. Lifts the spirits up, which is good.
Now, I just realised I called you TheGrizz. I'm not going to call you TheGrizz for the entire evening. You will get called Grizz.
That's all right then.
And we have a new time podcaster joining us in Kyptastic, who we will refer to as Kip. How are you this evening, mate?
Thank you very much for having me. I see you've driven right through the bottom of the barrel and hit bedrock to find me, but hopefully I can be of some interest to the viewers and the listeners.
I don't know if I'd call you the bottom of the bedrocks. We've got Sporno coming on next week. We'll call him the bottom of the barrel, and we'll see if he's been listening, because if he's been listening, he'll be able to heckle me about it next week. But we will jump straight into yesterday's game. As Grizz said, we did get a fabulous win, 13-point win over Hawthorne, which is always much loved. Grizz, I'll swing to you first, mate. My first thought out of yesterday was we sort of had to grind the win out yesterday, which is something that the Essendon of yesteryear probably wouldn't have done. We go into a game expected to win. They grind us down to their level. We stick with them, but we never get over the top, and then they eke away with the close win. Whereas the other way yesterday, they ground us down to their level. We ground it out and actually came away with the win. So I thought that was very pleasing.
Yeah, it was good to finally see us sort of buck up and win a game that wasn't on our terms. Generally, we don't like a lot of contested possession. We'd like the ball to be out in space with forward handball. But Hawthorne, as you know, Alistair Clarkson coach teams generally tend to do, is they put the game on their terms and they slowed it down to a crawl either in the contest or through slow kick mark. And you're right, in the old days, with we're down in Tassie, it's cold, we're not getting the game on our terms, we'd probably just pick our ball up and go home over the last 10 years. But it was good to see us sort of lift the intensity and toughen up in that second half. I mean, we learnt in the first half we were throwing an extra man at the contest, and they were just intercepting every loose kick we did forward to centre. But again, we sort of smartened up and toughed it out, and we matched them inside 50 forward one-on-one. And in that last turn, the ball just sort of freed up, and we sort of got the game on our terms, and we looked a better team then. But yeah, there was definitely some Essington vibes happening halfway through that second quarter when Hawthorne came back. I thought, oh no, here we go again. But I think that's just a sign of Rutten's Essendon at the moment, is that we're far more willing to tough it out. We saw it against West Coast. We got back in the game against Richmond before we got pummeled in that last 10 minutes because we're just exhausted. But yeah, it was great to see us tough it out, and that's good signs going ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that toughing out, especially when you see that there was a lot of players with down games. You wouldn't have said that someone like a Redmond or a Laverty or even Parrish and Merritt, who I'm sure we'll get to later, didn't have their best games. But and then obviously things like Hooker and Wright were basically invisible for most of the day. But we just kept fighting. We had enough individual brilliance from a Stringer, from a Hind, and obviously Harry Jones with the rising star to just keep with them. It sort of went goal for the middle of the game, and towards the end our class showed. Obviously Hawthorne are well coached, but they don't have the most enterprising players, and so once we wore them down, we were able to kick away and get that match winning lead towards the end of the game.
And Hawthorne are a well-drilled side, and I think we saw yesterday that, as you just said, they don't have the greatest squad in the world outside of Mitchell and Amira, and even then I'm a bit iffy on how good those blokes really are. They don't have a great deal of A-graders running around at the moment, especially with Sicily missing. But we will, after talking about how we grounded out and didn't have the game on our terms, I will swing to a positive here, Kip, and that is Jake Stringer. Now, he was sensational yesterday. I'll just reel off his stats quite quickly here. He had 29 disposals. He laid 7 tackles, which is huge for him. He kicked 4 goals. He had 687 metres gained, which again seems high for him. He had 12 score involvements. The 12 score involvements, if you consider that we actually scored 21 times, he was involved in more than half our scoring. He was phenomenal. He
was just untackable. I mean, you think about the players in the whole entire AFL that could play a game like that, you probably count them on one hand. You dust. The obvious comparison is Dustin Martin, but maybe a Bontempelli, maybe a Petrarca. De Goey can probably do that once every 2 years when he's not worried about court dates. So, that was incredible. And you just saw the way he just wanted to win, like more than any other player on the ground. He just wanted it more. He'd have 3 or 4 people hanging off him. He'd still get the handball away, although, some were a bit questionable. We won't complain about that. And then obviously just the way he willed some of those goals, the soccer kick forward, and then, the Euro 2020 finish. And then that last one where he just did the don't argue and managed to somehow bend it around. that whole way that goal was heading towards the sticks, I just thought there's no way that's going through, and it just managed to sneak through. And I think that willingness to get through the contest and be a presence all over the ground, we probably haven't seen him do that for an entire game before. We've had bits and pieces, he goes into the middle, he breaks the lines, or he can have a really good game forward. That's about the most complete game he may have ever played. It was just incredible to watch.
Yeah, and I think what was, for me, really interesting about Stringer is that he spent a lot of time up the ground on Sunday. And I think, with McGrath out, Caldwell out, Shield out, we've had those two out for a while, but we're really down on midfield troops, which is probably why we're throwing an extra number at the contest early. But yeah, Stringer went in there at different periods for the second and third quarter. And on top of all the stats Bonds just ratted off, there's also, he had 18 contested possessions for the game, which is a game high. He had more than Amira, more than Tom Mitchell. He had 6 clearances. He had 10 inside 50s, again, another game high. He was just it was a driving force out the centre at times too. And generally when he does that, he gets pretty gassed forward to centre. But you can tell he's getting sort of at the top of his fitness now, and he's able to run games out and just dominate, really, from the centre line onwards, as opposed to just inside forward 50. And he's probably, I would say, if you were to line up the 5 best players in a one-on-one situation inside forward 50 in the competition, Stringer would be right there. Like when he's got his men one-on-one inside 50, the opposition's freaking out. And I mean, those stats are something you'd get from AFL Live 2004 on your Xbox back 15 years ago. That's unbelievable type game. And I was just sort of thankful he was playing for us. And, he's out of contract. Just if you play like that every week, you'd pay him whatever he wants. But it's interesting going forward to seeing what he's priced at. But when he does something like that, you can't let those players go.
No, exactly. I mean, you can argue it was only Hawthorne and the like, and we've got Melbourne and Geelong coming up the next 2 weeks, so you want to see him do it against them. He doesn't have to produce like that sort of game, every week, but if he can do those sort of things on a more consistent basis, then you're probably looking at paying him that 650, almost even 700,000 a year if you could guarantee that performance over 4 years.
Yeah, and I just would like to take this time to mention that Darrow did want him traded earlier in the year. I did tell him that I'd give him a shout out on the podcast, and he's probably listened to the first 6 minutes of this intently, waiting to see when I'd throw it in there. The other thing I'd just like to point out about Jake is the 29 touches he had yesterday is actually his career high. It's equal his career high. He had just got 29 previously. He did it in dream time at the G in 2018 against Richmond when they thumped us by 71 points, and he was a highlight in a very poor night that night. But other than that, 22 touches is his third highest. So he doesn't usually get a heap of touches, but yeah, yesterday he was just unreal. And that fend-off goal in the last quarter was just something special, and the commentators did go ballistic. But another player the commentators did lose it over when they kicked a goal was Nick Hind in the third. And Grizz, I'm loath to make the comparison because I like to think of him on his own merits, and I don't want to think about him as, the Sard replacement. But if you compare him to what Sard was being given Carlton, we've come out pretty well at the moment, considering we got pick 8 for Sard.
Yeah, look, that's looking like a real win at the moment, particularly how I loved Sardi when he was here, but the Carlton's not going great, and he's got a lot of bad pressure for them at the moment. But what I loved about Nick Hind's game was 2 things. The first is he actually had 10 intercept possessions. So he was defending first, then running, which you see a lot of halfbacks fly off the halfback line, run to the wing and get cheap possessions. He was winning genuine one-on-ones, hard balls inside defensive 50, which was a real credit to him. And when you can tell that's a real cornerstone of Truck's game plan at the moment, is that defenders defend. Then when you've got the ball, feel free to split and attack head of the football. And what I like about Nick Hind is commentators like to talk about bravery in football, and there's backing back with the flight and putting your head over the football, but being willing to run and being brave enough to leave your man like he does, trust your teammates to cover and just leg it upfield. That goal he kicked running from defensive 50, he could have got that cheap stat out the back and just stopped there, but he bravely took the run on and split the middle of the field. And when the game was slowing down and Hawthorne was turning it into that sludge sort of contested possession, kick mark, slow game, he was the one guy on our team, probably other than Stringer, that was breaking that zone purely just by, getting the ball and splitting. And a couple of times it came off not so great, got caught a couple of times. But for the 8 times that he does get that line break and gets it forward of the football, you take the 2 times he gets caught. He's just probably the best pickup in the AFL this year. for what he's producing for what you give up for him, the best recruit of the year, and it's not even close.
What are St Kilda supporters thinking? Looking at him, thinking, they probably didn't even pay attention to when he was traded. They obviously didn't use the picks, and then to see what he's producing, especially when someone like St Kilda is, crying out for some dare. I mean, you've got to ask questions of their list management, but it's not a St Kilda podcast, so we'll stop there. I mean, it's basically all Australian form. I mean, I know they don't usually give all Australian nods to players who have a really good season. They usually like to build up, but there's not many halfbacks doing what he does. I mean, I know we make the comparison to Sard a lot, but he kind of makes me think of more like a Connor McKenna who grew up playing football. So not only has he got that line breaking speed, he really wants to take the game on, but he's also got that footy smart. He's obviously someone who's grown up playing football, knows when to go, as you said, knows when to do the hard things. He's obviously come up through the VFL, missed a lot of that pathway stuff, so he's really had to grind to become this sort of player. And so that really shows in his work ethic. He knows he has to work hard. He can't just do the flashy stuff. And it's a real point difference. And as we sort of said, Hawthorne trying to grind the game down, really lock it down. But when you've got a player like that can just break through a zone, that's when teams like Hawthorne fall apart, because they just don't have an answer to it.
Grizz, I just want to come back to what you were saying about his bravery and his willingness to run off and attack and back himself in. I mean, one of the main reasons he's able to back himself in is because of his speed. He's got that pace that he's got pace to burn, and he's one of the few players in the AFL that could probably give his opponent a 15-metre head start running back the other way, and you would be confident he's going to be there shoulder by shoulder by the time the ball gets to them. And we've seen it this year. He's chased multiple players down running back towards goal. So it's bravery, absolutely, but at the same time, it's just ultra confidence in his ability, isn't it, really? I mean, that's just something that I think, as you were saying, Kip, you can't really teach. It's just what you grow up with. Yeah,
and I would say that that's absolutely true. Like, you've got to have pace to use it, and he knows he has it. So short of it being, Jason Johannesson on his tail, he's probably just going to leg it and take the risk that he doesn't get tackled. But Nick Hind can only be Nick Hind if there's a Matt Guelphy or a Dyson Heppel rolling back to cover his man in case there's a turnover, which I think is really important. You see, like for Richmond, when Jane Short goes, it's Camden McIntosh splitting back from the wing to cover his man. When Tom Stewart or one of those guys go from Geelong, it's Cam Guthrie or it's, Sam Menegola folding back to cover their man. It's a real, if you want Nick Hind to do what he does, which he does so well, it's a team task of making sure you're covering in case there's a quick turnover like there was on a couple of occasions where he got caught.
I think you make a really good point, especially with someone like a Dyson Heppel, he's copped a lot of criticism unfairly this year. Yeah, he's not the same player that he was, but he's still a very smart footballer, and he does all the team things that you want him to do, not just because he's captain, but because that's what his role and responsibility is. He's been safe as houses, basically. You can probably count the missed kicks on one hand across this year. Everything else, like whenever he's involved in a contest, he almost always wins it or halves it. And as he said, it gives players like a Hind or like a Redmond that opportunity to run off and do that exciting stuff, because it just gives them the confidence that they've got protection back there.
And I was happy you mentioned the Matt Guelphys and the Dyson Heppels of the world, Grizz, because I'm going to use that as a segue to move from the fastest player on our list to probably one of the slowest players on our list. And that is the man that returned yesterday in Sam Draper. Now, I'm probably one of the few on the board, and I suppose there's actually probably more of us than I realised that haven't brought into the massive hype that seems to be surrounding him at times. He's been a very, very, very good VFL ruckman, but as we know, there's a big difference at VFL level to AFL level for rucking. And whilst he's been solid at AFL level, I don't think I'd seen him play a game like he did yesterday. And I think he was playing the Max Gawn role yesterday, Kip, and that is he was going behind the play, he was taking the mark, he was intercepting, he was punching, and that's what Max Gawn does. And I think that's the prototype we're going to have to hope for Sam Draper, because he's definitely not going to be the agile, mobile, Brody Grundy type. He's going to be the Max Gawn who just has to rely on his positioning and football smarts to position himself in the right spot.
Well, he clearly knows where to position. He was clunking those contested marks on the wing, cutting off the Hawthorne forward thrust, particularly in that first quarter. I think it was really noticeable. He took 2 or 3 big contested marks and really set up the fact that we were in front in the first quarters, partly because of him. And the thing I was most impressed with is he just came back, and he was fit, he was in form. He took 25 of the 27 centre bounces for the day. So, I think we were on the board talking a lot about, do we need Phillips to cover, because he's probably not going to play a huge amount of game time. He played 82% of game time, took those centre bounces, was still performing towards the end of the game. And then you're talking about the impact Stringer had at clearances. Well, Sam Draper had the most clearances on the ground. He had 9 clearances. I mean, that one where he took it out of the ruck and ran forward, if he'd gone through and kicked that goal rather than try to hand pass it to Langford, I think the whole stadium would have exploded. It was almost the most amazing piece of play. But I think just the most important thing about him is he just gives so much energy to those around him. I mean, if you've seen the video of him celebrating in the circle after the game for the song, the players all love to play with him. I mean, who wouldn't? Like, he's this massive man mountain who just got this big smile on his face, this big, dirty, great big mullet. And he obviously gets around the players and protects them. I mean, you've seen the way he tackles some players, seeing how he treated Nick Nat last year. I think next week up against Gawn, it's a huge challenge for him, but I think it's one he's really going to be keen to take up because, as you say, Gawn is sort of the prototype for what he wants to be. And if he can take it up to Gawn and do what he does and match him, I think the sky's the limit for him.
I think it covered most of what I would want to cover, except that I find with young ruckman, half the battle or half the secret to success for ruckman are they have to just be competitive. They have to be, if not mongrel, then the most competitive guy on your team, because it's probably the most combative position on the ground when you think about 50 to 100 times a game, you're wrestling to jumping into a bloke to tackling to getting clearances. And he just looks like he wants the contest. He loves to throw his body around. He loves tackling guys. He loves the competitive side of the game, which I think goes underestimated with ruckman. If you were to compare the ruckman of the careers of Beanpole athletic, all-world athlete ruckman compared to the Shane Mumfords, the Toby Nankervises, the Max Gawns of the world, the guys who are competitive and combative and big are the ones that generally end up lasting. And so I think we've got one there in Draper. I think Nankervis is probably my best comparison for him, like realistically. And Nankervis is a 3 times premiership ruckman. So, that's a good comparison, I think, because of his size and his ability to win clearances and beat guys up around the football. But yeah, it's really exciting. I don't think I've seen a more hyped, uncapped player before he debuted last year, but he certainly seems to be worth the wait based on the few games he has played. Wasn't
he offered a 4-year deal by the Saints prior to even playing a game? I think there's a lot of people who've seen the potential. We're pretty lucky that he stuck fat with us. As I said, it's obviously that you see it with the young guys. I don't know how many of you follow them on Instagram, but they're always getting around each other. They're really happy to celebrate each other's success. And I think he's a big part of that. He's a real driver of that club culture, that bringing the boys together and sticking by each other.
Well, there is another player that I do want to. We will go positive just for one more player, and that is, of course, the man that wore long sleeves yesterday, number 23, Grizz in Harrison Jones. Now, I think it was 5 or 6 contested marks he took in the end, but he's just his presence around the ground, and Hooker obviously stole one off him with his free kick that he got. But his presence around the ground yesterday was just amazing, and I think I have been fairly vocal on here saying that he's been good, but he hasn't given us a 4-quarter performance. I reckon yesterday was pretty close to a 4-quarter performance.
Yeah, he was a couple of wonky set shots away from having a really good day out. He kicked 2 goals, 1. If he didn't shank that last one and didn't kick one of the worst helicopters I've ever seen in that first quarter, it would have been a genuine 9 out of 10 performance considering the conditions. I heard a really good judge, I think it was Jason Dunstall on Fox Sports, say that the tell of a really good key forward, young key forward, is their ability to take contested marks in their first couple of years of football. And he seems like he has that pat. He's, you hear the take the ball at its highest point, which is a bit of a silly saying, but he takes the ball at his highest point. So at the highest point of his jump, that's when he's getting his hands on the football, which just makes it really hard to spoil. And that's really hard to teach. And he's already got it. So once he fills out, and he covered the most amount of meters or kilometres than anyone else on the field yesterday, 15.9, which is more than any other player, including midfielders on the ground. So he's got the work rate. He can take his tested marks. Once he fills out, he's going to be one hell of a player. And I'm always partial to a player that wears long sleeves, so that's good as well.
I think that the point about contested marking is really good. It's not just that he's a good contested mark and like crashing packs and taking big grabs. He can time his run. They were talking about in the commentary how he has a little stutter step just to set himself to get the perfect leap. And like those contested marks he was taking, like they were in big pack situations, and he was just reading the flight of the ball better. I mean, I know this, when you've got these young key forwards, you're like, oh, just wait till they bulk up and, can start contesting for the ball. But I'm not sure how much you want to bulk him up. I mean, as you pointed out, he ran 16 kilometres. I mean, that's a weapon in itself. Like towards the end, like you saw in the fourth quarter, he was getting off the chain. He was getting free. He was playing on Sean Burgoyne for a bit. So I mean, you can argue potentially about the quality of defender, in terms of just the fact that Burgoyne's obviously a quality player, but he's not a key defender. But the fact that he can run so far, that he's the highest running player on the ground, I mean, he's going to burn off a lot of defenders and really be a big part of games towards the end. He's going to be a big factor towards the end of games. So you obviously put on some weight, but you probably don't want to turn him into the next Cale Hooker. You want him to be, more of a Nick Riewoldt type.
Yeah, I think the Riewoldt comparison is apt, but I will just quickly, Grizz, we'll swing our attention, and we'll go a little bit negative here, and we do loathe to go negative on this podcast. We have generally been positive. And I'm going to start with Devon Smith. Now, I actually still like Devon Smith, and I think there is still a spot for it in our team for Devon Smith. And I can't remember who said it on the board yesterday, but somebody said, because he's not the only one applying pressure now, what he's not doing the other way stands out a lot more. He used to be one of the few that would run his ass off, so you'd allow him a little bit of leeway. But that push in the back free kick had to be one of the dumbest free kicks, and he's not alone. Matt Guelphy, the 50s that Guelphy gave away 2 50s yesterday for umpire abuse. Now, I know some people think, I'm a little lenient on umpires, and I admit that I am a lot more lenient than a lot of our posters on the board. But at AFL level, to give away 2 50s in a game for umpire abuse is unforgivable. Sometimes our players seem to forget that they don't need to cross the line. Push the line by all means, but cross it. And yesterday, Devon and Matt were the two offenders for mine.
Yeah, I don't think you're being harsh. One of my pet hates is abusing the umpire, because you say to juniors when they play all the time, no good can come from it. Like, you're never going to change their mind. No matter what you do, the only possible thing that you can do is make the situation worse. So I have no issue with going hard on Guelphy for those. I think with Devon, from what I can tell, it looks like he's lost a yard of pace just over that first 20 metres, which means the pressure he puts on is just a little bit slower than he'd like, or when he was in 2018 when he won our best and fairest. But and when you're not feeling great and you're coming back from injury and the game's just a bit too quick for you, I think he'll get there. But when he comes back and he's just not in the form he wants, you get frustrated. And unfortunately for Devon, when he gets frustrated, he doesn't always channel it in a productive way. Sometimes it's a cheap 50, or it's just going to be a cheap 50 or a push in the back to cost his team. And I think with the amount of injuries we've had to our midfield, he probably stays in the team regardless, which I don't really like. You want to be there on merit, but I think unfortunately, it cost us 3 clear shots on goal on the weekend. Pushing back led to a goal by Kajitsky, and 2 50s led to points, I think, by Kajitsky and someone else. And in a game that's decided by 13 points, you can't be doing it. You can't shoot yourself in the foot the way we did on the weekend.
Yeah, so Kip, I actually have a theory about Devon Smith, and I'll just put it to you. And it sort of goes back to what I was saying before about the fact that he's not the only one that does that high-pressure defensive work at the forward line anymore. Is he the kind of player that he needs to be a standout at something? He puts a lot of pressure on himself, so he needs to feel that he's dominating one area. And because he's not doing that anymore, he's starting to try and do too much in other areas. For example, he's seemingly, every time he gets the ball, he's just taken a flying shot for goal. That shot that he took that led to Cale's goal, now we got a goal from it, that's great. But that was one of the worst decisions I've seen. He was off balance. He's 50 metres out. He's got a bloke that's clearly within smothering distance, and he tries to ping for goal instead of going for the hands backwards or the smart kick. Is he the kind of player that thinks he needs to dominate, and because he's not leading the way, I suppose, in that forward pressure room, he's trying to do it either through his physical intentions or through his attempts to kick goal of the year seemingly every possession?
It's hard with Devon. I mean, he set such a high standard when he came here that first year, as you say, like he was that real pressure forward, and obviously he won the best and fairest. He was the best. He was getting written up in the papers. He's the best tackler in the league and things like that. And then obviously the injuries hit, and you see a lot with players that get a lot of injuries and start to slow down, and they can't quite do the things that they used to, and then they start to become undisciplined, or they start giving away the free kicks and things like that. And as you say, like he has got a bit of that, look at me about him. So, like, he's kicked some great goals, but you see from his reaction how much he really loves the idea of being that hero, kicking those hero goals, doing those big hero moments. And as you say, the kick that led to Cale's goal, that was, he was already preparing his celebration, turning to the crowd, hands in the air, look at me, how good I am. I mean, he still has the possibility to be a very good player, but when he's bad, he's just horrid, and he just makes it worse for himself with those poor decisions and those, the cheap shot sort of things. So I don't know. We're obviously missing Snelling. I think the last couple of weeks probably quietened a lot of the Snelling doubters about how much we miss him. I mean, Devon at his best is a better version of what Snelling's been provided, but he's nowhere near his best at the moment.
Now, lads, we will just leave yesterday's game behind for now. We will switch to the coming week, and we'll quickly touch on the Melbourne game. So what are we most looking forward to this week? They are, at the moment, the yardstick of the comp. They are the top of the ladder. They are the team that everybody wants to beat. For mine, Grizz, I'm very interested to see how our midfield stack up. I mean, Parish and Merritt, by their lofty standards, were relatively quiet yesterday. I think they still ended up both having 25-odd touches each. So I'm very interested to see how they go against Melbourne's star-studded midfield in Oliver and Petrarca, and obviously at the feet of Gawn. What are you looking forward to most out of this coming weekend?
Yeah, I'm looking to see how we stand up against who I think is clearly the best team in the competition in Melbourne. And what made Melbourne so effective is not only their clearance game and their midfield, like you touched on, but their structure behind the ball is almost second to none in the competition, maybe behind Geelong. And so if we do what we did in the first half against Hawthorne and partway through the third quarter where we just kick the ball blindly out of a contest, Melbourne are going to pick us off. So I'm really keen to see how we attack the game plan, whether we bring the pressure and bring the heat. If we don't, Melbourne are just going to plough over the top of us. So see if we come ready to play, if I can use that parlance, and to see who stands up in the midfield. So they've got James Harms, who does a pretty good tagging job, and he'll do one of Merritt or Parish. Who steps up and helps the other one out in the midfield? Is it Stringer? Is it Perkins goes in there? Is it Guelphy, Ham, Heppel, whoever it is? I want to see, who's up for the fight on the weekend, because Melbourne are clearly the best. So I want to see really where we are in the pecking order.
Yeah, I think looking at Melbourne, obviously they've got really good lines all around the ground. But I think their defensive line has been the most solid. And I think looking at the performance of our forward line on the weekend, we really need big games from players like Hooker and Wright to really make your Stephen Mays and your Jake Levers accountable. If we can make them accountable, then it does cut off a lot of that intercepting game you're talking about. I think we have the top-end talent to match them in the midfield. We're going to struggle in terms of the depth, but if we get a Stringer performance like we did last week, then that helps mitigate that a bit. As I was saying earlier, Gawn versus Draper, I think, is a mouth-watering prospect, and I think could be one of the matchups that people look forward to in the next few years. And then I think our defence will match up pretty well against their forward line, but I think the match is probably going to be won, as always, in the midfield, but also how well our attack can match their defence.
So I'll get your tips, and I'll stick with you, Kip. Now I'll just jump in and say that I'm tipping us to probably lose by 4 to 5 goals. I think they're just a bridge too far for us at the moment. But what's your tip? Do we stand a chance?
Well, if you go by Melbourne's form, they're only losing to teams outside the top 8, so I think we're a chance because of that. Just from that, so I'm rushing to put my bank account on them right now. It's hard because we've got this game, the Geelong game, and I think the Dogs game in the next remainder of the season, and I think are the ones that we're almost certain to lose. But I feel like we're going to snatch one. And just looking at those 3 teams, I think Melbourne may be the one that's the most vulnerable to our style of play, potentially. So I'm going to call a 2-goal win to Essendon, but I'm most likely to be wrong.
Oh, that is bold.
Mate, if you're right, we're going to have to have you on for every podcast for the rest of the year and have you tip Essendon.
It's a fool's hope.
Okay.
But there's always hope.
Yeah, my tip is I think we'll match them early, but I think their power and their depth, like Kip said, to the midfield is pretty strong, and I think they'll probably do a Richmond in that it'll be close to the first maybe 2.5 quarters, and they'll probably work away late. I'm tipping a 6 to 7 goal win by Melbourne, but certainly no admirers lost by us.
Well, lads, I think that's just going to about call us for this evening. So thank you both very much for coming on. Kip, I hope we didn't scare you off too much.
No, I really enjoyed it. Hopefully I've added some value and you'll want to have me back sometime.
And Grizz, thank you for stepping in as our experienced podcast member this evening.
No worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
Now, unfortunately, we didn't quite get to the topic Amy asked us, which was where does Zerk Thatcher fit into the side? I'll just quickly say I think he only fits into the side at the moment if there is an injury to Laverde, Stewart or Francis. I don't see us being able to play all four, despite East Dog's best wishes. And I also there has been a bit of conversation about playing Draper and Phillips, and I'll just quickly jump in and take responsibility and say that is not a possibility, because you cannot play Wright, Draper, Stringer, Jones and Hooker all in the one forward line. It just is too big and too slow. But now I've had my rants and managed to end the podcast with my thoughts only. That will do us this evening. So if you are looking to jump onto the podcast, as Kip has done this evening, he will tell you that it is quite a easy and memorable experience. We are not too harsh at all, although I think we did have some fun trying to get him on earlier. But once again, thank you very much for listening, everybody.